Good evening, everyone. We are fortunate this evening to have Andy Meyer with us, who is an award-winning political ad maker for leading Democratic candidates and progressive causes. He does that as a partner in AL Media. Most recently, Andy led Senator Warnock's digital advertising program during his victories in 2020 and 2022, and he's helped make hundreds of TV and digital ads for candidates from Maine to Hawaii. As I said, he works for AL Media, and he lives here in Hanover with his wife, Emily, their two daughters, and a puppy who can't stay out of trouble, but got in trouble again, but is back, apparently. So
He ran away last night, so I was out until 6:30 in the morning.
But he came back.
Yes.
He came back. We're not going to. We'll get to depressing places.
He was an Eagles fan and upset with how things worked out and needed some private time. So I apologize if his barking and howling at the moon kept anyone but myself up at night last night. But and if I'm searching for a noun or something, that is why. It's a lack of
sleep. Too little sleep.
Yeah.
So tell us what you do, and by that I mean we know you make ads, but the ads are a means to an end. So tell us what your ads are designed to get people to do.
Sure, and I should say too, while we do all the digital ads for people like Senator Warnock, we don't do any of the fundraising ads or the emails. So if you got all those text messages and emails 3 or 4 times a day, that was not me, and I won't take responsibility for it. Our firm is based in Chicago, but we are now, thanks to COVID, we are spread out across the country. And what we do is we work with progressive candidates and causes and organizations to help them craft their message, to help them develop a strategy both for what they're saying and how they're saying it. And so our firm, we pride ourselves on doing everything in-house. Thanks to COVID, it's in our homes. But we do ad production, we do ad buying, strategy, and I think we've sort of built our firm, we like to say, by sort of over-servicing and undercharging our clients. And so...
Do they feel the same way?
Depends on the outcome, I think. But what that means is we also will help with writing speeches, press releases, sort of anything we can just to help be some arms and legs at the beginning of a campaign.
And how is all that different than selling cornflakes or tennis shoes?
That's a great question. So my wife, who I think some of you all, Russ, knows, she is smarter than I am, she is prettier than I am, she's a better parent than I am, and unfortunately she's a better speaker than I am. I'm taller than her, but that's about it. But she works for a big PR firm. And one day she said to me, like, Andy, I think you're better at your job than I am at mine. And I said, that can't be possible. You're better than, she said, it's just tough to sort of stay late to try to sell Campbell Soup. Not that Campbell Soup is a bad company, but I am lucky enough to get to work really hard on generally issues, candidates, and causes that I care about. I think the other thing that's a little different than selling cornflakes, I think that's a great question, is I'm a very competitive person who's a very bad athlete. And one of the reasons I think I started working on campaigns and then became a consultant is because there's a winning and losing aspect. If you're selling cornflakes, you hope Kellogg's has a better quarter, and that translates to more profits and, a better bonus at the end of the year. But if you're up 3% or down 3%, probably things aren't going to change. In politics, margins don't really matter. It's like winning a game, whether you win by 1 point or 8 points. The outcome is a win or loss, and I think I sort of thrive on that. And I think a lot of people in our business, most of them are better athletes than I am, but they have that competitive aspect to them.
So tell us how you got into the business, and in particular about your experience in opposition research, and maybe a little bit about what your life would be like now if you never got out of opposition research.
Sure. So the first paid job that I had on a campaign was for a guy named Ken Salazar, who was running for Senate in 2004 in Colorado. I got that, I went to school in Colorado, I graduated, and then I had probably a bad career decision. There were 2 Senate campaigns that I interviewed for. One was Ken Salazar, who's a great guy. The other was Barack Obama. back home, and I regret my decision. But the way that I got that job was he was running against a guy named Pete Coors, who was the heir to the Coors Brewing dynasty. And about a year before, somebody had written a book called Citizen Coors. He was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And I read it before my interview. And I think an opposition researcher has to do a lot of reading. No one else had read it. So when they found out that they had somebody who had already read the book, I was hired that day.
And what is it like to spend your life trying to find the worst about somebody you don't necessarily want to elect? And what would your opposition, if someone did it for you, you must have thought about that while you were...
Well, I'll give you an example. It's a terrible way to live your life. There was an ad, so Ken Salazar was a tremendously great guy when I worked for him, and he ran against Pete Coors. And Ken Salazar grew up without electricity or a telephone until he was in high school. And he and his 11 brothers or sisters, might be 10, all went to college. The remarkable family. His brother was elected to Congress the same year. And Pete Coors was a guy who inherited Coors. But I remember this was in 2004, and one of the things was Pete Coors was Catholic and said that he believed in the dignity of life, and so he opposed abortion without exceptions. And he didn't have an official strong statement on the death penalty, but he sort of fudged. So what we did was this was before my first ad, but when I was sort of coming up with a concept, I said, well, why don't we say that he's against the death penalty and give him, say that he believes in the dignity of human life. So we ran an ad, and it started with a picture of Osama bin Laden, because this was 2004, and it zooms in on him.
Always a good start.
Always a good start, and it clicks in, and it says, Osama bin Laden killed 3,000 Americans. If captured, Pete Coors wouldn't put him to death. And I was 22, right? And Pete Coors, to his credit, I think the guy had no business being in the Senate, or at least not as much business as Ken Salazar. But this was at a time when they would have, Meet the Press would have these Senate debates, and Tim Russert had him on. The first question was, they showed the ad, and they said, this is a pretty serious accusation. And what do you say? And Pete Coors, to his credit, said, I believe in the dignity of human life. I would put him in a 3-foot by 3-foot cell, but I don't believe in murder, and I consider it that. And once again, that was sort of in our line of work, there are levels of grayness of sort of what is truthful and what isn't, and what's a fair attack and what isn't. And that always sort of hits me as a pretty awful attack that we made, but also a reminder that people on the other side, even if you disagree with them, sometimes, not always, but sometimes there actually are folks who believe in something in their core, and that's something I think that should be respected on either side of the aisle when that happens.
So if we were having this conversation 25 or 30 years ago, we'd be talking almost exclusively about television and radio spots on the big broadcast channel, maybe a little bit of cable. Walk us through how that has, the day-to-day business of what you do has changed as the media landscape has changed.
That's great. And if you notice, I avoided the question of what an opposition researcher would say about me.
I'll pass that out later. We've had somebody working since Tuesday.
The media, so I think a lot of things have changed in politics. Part of it is that there's more money in politics, which allows us to spend it in more places. But the biggest changes have happened in how we, as voters, as viewers, consume media. There are two sort of, a number of years ago, we started a digital practice when digital was sort of its own separate and apart thing from TV. I still think there's sort of no faster way to move people than a 30-second ad on a 60-inch TV or whatever this is here. But increasingly, what's digital and what is TV are merging. Part of this is how, and just to illustrate that, last cycle, so in the 2022 cycle, a little over 50% of our YouTube ads appeared on a television screen. Looking back 2 years before that, it was under 25%. And if you go back 2 years before that, Google or YouTube wouldn't even show us TV as an option. And so when we think of YouTube as digital, but if it appears on a TV screen, like, what is it? The other thing that I spend a lot of time looking at, Charlie, is how do we target our ads? And broadcast is literally broadcast. If you're running for Senate here, you have to advertise either on one station here in Boston, in Manchester, WMUR, or Boston Media Market, or I guess here we're Plattsburgh, New York. But you talk to everyone. On digital and everything, you can get more precise, which is a real game changer and allows us to, the types of technology that we can do, we can serve ads now to say, if I saw, Charlie, an ad from you, if your device saw an ad, I can then basically be listening to your computer or TV and then run an ad going against that. So it would only go on devices that had seen Charlie's ad and things like that, which are totally allow us to really make more customized ads and run multiple tracks at a time.
So as I sit here as a policy person, I see a trade-off there, which is you can narrowcast.
Yes.
It's very efficient, it's very targeted. On the other hand, it means that the campaign we're all seeing is not the same, and therefore your candidate is not elected, or maybe there are different variations of the same theme, but it could be, it's not like you've got three big themes that you ran on NBC and everybody's come to the same party.
I think that's exactly right, and sort of the biggest example of that was in 2016, where there were all of these especially on Facebook, lots of ads that went under the radar. Whereas every TV ad, it costs a lot of money to do an ad. It is all public. The buy is public down to the penny. I know the FCC has to, every station has to report every ad that gets run. Online, there's nothing like that. And once again, if there isn't a big difference between Hulu, how somebody watches something on Hulu versus how they watch something on NBC, those can go under the radar. On Facebook, those definitely went under the radar. About 2 or 3 years ago, Facebook and Google started a voluntary transparency database, which anyone can go up and look at, and you can search all of any ad that has a penny spent behind it, but still there's a lot of under the radar stuff, and I think that is it can be corrosive to some extent in politics.
So let's talk about what a good ad looks like.
Yeah.
And good, you're going to need to define. I assume it's an effective ad. It may be getting someone to show up. It may be reinforcing what they believe. It may be maybe keeping them away from the polls. I don't know. So both talk about what, in your eyes, a good ad looks like, and then maybe we can look at some of the ones you've done.
Well, I think it's a great point, and maybe what I'll do here in a second is we have our firm. We have like what's called our sizzle reel. It's like a 2-minute chop up of a lot of things, and I'm happy to show that maybe to sort of set the table. I think one of the really important things to always keep in mind in political ads are every candidate has a very different path to victory, and so what is that ad trying to accomplish? For a lot of folks, there's nothing more important than just positive name ID, whereas a lot of people who are habitual voters don't know who their member of Congress is. And so if you are going to the polls instead of skipping over that just to say, oh, Charlie, I like that guy, that can be really important. If you don't have a lot of money, having something that will stand out. If you do have a lot of money, it's a different thing. There's another ad which I can show later in Senator Warnock's case. in this latest runoff, they shortened the window. This was a campaign where money was literally no object. I mean, we were thinking about doing a drone show at one point. But we saw they cut in half or more than half the early voting period. And they cut the places this cycle where you could do early voting in the runoff. And so what we were seeing is a lot of people leaving the lines. And so we created a whole ad campaign that was up for like 4 days, literally doing anything we can just to target people who were in line. And the whole message is like, get in line, stay in line. I can figure out, I don't remember the exact words, I can find it on this reel, but that was a hyper-specific ad as opposed to a lot of other ones where we want to elicit either memorability, likability, or just a lot of times too, it's just easier to make people think something bad about somebody else than it is good about your candidate. So sometimes that's a big part of it too.
So I think we know the brain science that fear is a much more powerful motivator than hope and excitement and everything. So the ads, and we're going to watch yours, but can be a bit foreboding.
Yep.
You know, the ominous, and dare I say, when they're running over and over again, people don't always like them. So how do you feel about getting into people's living rooms or onto their computers with sometimes messages that are not the brightest part of human nature?
It is, so what Charlie has only told, I think, a select few of you is that he was a candidate for office and had a really great ad.
Wait, is this the trophy?
Oh
my God.
How did that end up there? But I think, I'm trying to remember the exact, where my train of thought was going. You know, I think one of the problems that we face with candidates is, another difference between selling cornflakes is Kellogg's and Corn Flakes has a CMO and a whole team of market researchers and people who know about advertising and have a lot of research going into what they're doing and know a lot about their customers. Campaigns, almost no campaign has a CMO. Maybe a presidential campaign does. Campaigns are generally run by an attorney or a businessman or woman or a professor or someone who doesn't have a marketing background and who can be fairly afraid of taking chances. And they're surrounded by people and their campaign manager and their pollster and often their political consultants and their ad makers who are also nervous about taking chances. And the end result is that many ads end up looking the same, and it is, I think in large part, we a lot of times will pitch all these ideas and everyone's like, I want an ad that's funny, I want an ad that's creative, I want an ad that cuts through. And then when we see the scripts, they're like, no, I just want you to say like, not just one or two bad things about my opponent, but like try to fit in like 6 bad things about my opponent. And that is, that's I think bad for the effect of the ads.
So before we go to your reel, are there ads either historical or contemporary that you admire that other people have done, including perhaps your opponents, where you look at it and say, in terms of moving the dial on opinion, that was a really either creative or effective ad?
I think a lot of the most effective ads are often done in a primary. And I think that is because it's harder to separate yourself from your opponents in a primary. Because you agree with your opponents on probably 95% of the issues and the issues that you care about. So I think a lot of the most creative ads are there. There's a famous ad from Illinois where we both used to live for a woman named Dawn Clark Netsch, who is running for governor. And she was a short woman in her 60s. And the whole ad is her playing pool.
And I still remember it, which is testimony to the power of it. There are probably only 3 or 4 of all of Illinois politics I'd remember.
And she's just shooting pool, and she's hitting all these sort of trick shots. In the end, it's like Don Clark Netsch, she's a straight shooter. Because Illinois is sort of known for a few politicians that aren't. And she, I think, was third in the primary, third or fourth in the polls, but ended up coming out ahead because, you know, you don't care a huge amount about these different people, but it was a really memorable ad. It had a message behind it. She's a sharp, straight shooter. It showed it. It wasn't giving 8 facts behind it, but it drew you in, and I think that is a really good ad. I think Ron DeSantis had this really cheesy ad when he ran for governor with like his baby who he was like saying, build that wall, but it was another memorable ad. It went to sort of a different part of your psychology, but once again, I think being memorable and positive name ID is a huge part of our work, especially in primaries.
So do you want to show these and we can talk about,
Sure.
after we've seen the reel, you can talk about some of the things that you want to.
And I apologize. This is a little bit too like showing slides of a vacation that you weren't on, so this might be a little boring, but it's about a 2-minute thing that this is what we do when we are pitching folks to sort of set the mood about our firm. Yep. Let's see if this works.
Who are you?
I went down an old dirt road, shotgun house, and I went knocking on doors. I said, sir, I'm Jamie Harrison.
If it seems Congressman Brad Schneider is everywhere, it's probably because he is.
Oh, one thing hasn't changed. Krista, crispy.
That's a tough one.
Call me Raja.
I love insurance companies.
Senator,
Deborah.
are you writing a love letter to insurance companies?
Now, Deborah.
Buck Dole supports the Tea Party? I don't like it.
Better in the can.
Next.
We are writing the next chapter of Georgia's future, where no one is unseen, no one is unheard, and no one is uninspired.
We have a moment in time. My name is on the ballot, but these are the issues that are on the ballot.
Make sure everybody gets a fighting chance.
That's what I do. And voting, that's something we do.
I'm Michelle Wu.
I'm Raphael Warnock.
I'm Brad Schneider.
I'm Jamie
I'm
Harrison.
Robin Kelly.
Shamia Fagan.
Val Deming. Stacey Abrams.
Kwame Raoul. I'm Joe Biden.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
That's you.
So that's sort of how we set the table usually when we're
Are
meeting with
there
folks.
one or two from that you want to pull out and talk about? I mean, some of those feature the candidates more prominently. Others go to citizens reacting.
This is an ad that I had nothing to do with, but I thought it was pretty well done. This was, so we did a guy named Dan McKee who ran for governor in Rhode Island. He was appointed to the position, or he was the lieutenant governor, and when Governor Raimondo became the Secretary of Commerce, he was elevated. And this was in I think this was in the primary, and I think this is one of our better funny ads. The other problem why a lot of funny political ads don't work is a lot of politicians aren't funny. But their moms are, so.
Ever since Mom moved back in, we play cards.
I even let him win sometimes.
Mom always said it doesn't matter what cards you get, it's how you play your hand. We got dealt a pandemic and delivered one of the nation's best economic recoveries.
Pretty good.
We got rid of the car tax,
Finally.
and we are creating affordable housing and passing gun safety laws that keep our families safe. Not bad for a year and a half.
Not bad for a governor that lives with his mother.
Whose idea is that? His or his mother's?
Well, so I think a big part of what we do is when we get hired is we have like a 90-minute call with people because we call it a bio call. It's really important to learn about the candidate. Like we would not have known that Governor McKee lived with his mother, and things like that come out. We had a candidate who ran for governor of Iowa, and he used to run an insurance company. And it was like the most boring call I've ever been a part of. He's like, in 1988, we got into the annuity business and our, gross revenue went up, 4.4%, which was better than it was, when it was 4. And then at the end of this call, he says, and right after my wife and I got married, we went on a trip around the world and we were hijacked in Afghanistan and we were stuck on the plane for about 5 days. And it's just like as a throwaway line. And then another example, I'll just show one more ad. This one gets a little long, but about these stories. There are some candidates who are really good storytellers. And when that happens, you want to capture that. So there's a guy named Jamie Harrison who is now the chairman of the Democratic Party. And this was an ad that we made. Doesn't look anything like those highly produced ads. This was done for digital. And what we did was we just he had his stump speech. And we went without telling him this. We just took his stump speech and we tried to turn it into a ad that was meant for phones, and it's called Old Dirt Road.
I went to rural county in South Carolina, but I went down an old dirt road, shotgun house, and I went knocking on doors. Old African-American man came to the door, and he said, son, who are you and what you want? I said, sir, I'm Jamie Harrison. He looked at me and he said, okay, what do you want? I said, sir, this is the most consequential election. And he said, son, let me tell you something. He said, you see that road that you drove up on? I said, yes, sir. He said, what kind of road is that? He said, it's a dirt road. He said, son, that was a dirt road when Ronald Reagan was president, when both of the Bushes were president. It was a dirt road when Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were president. Son, that's still a goddamn dirt road. And until either a Democrat or a Republican pays my road, I don't want to deal with any of it. He shut his door. Now, I'm a little hurt. But then I started thinking about it. The most important thing to this man was his dirt road. And he'd heard all the political speeches, people talking about it doing this and that, but nobody has still paved his road. That road is symbolic for so many things, for so many of us across the state. It might not be a dirt road for the people in Allendale, but it may be schools. Might not be a dirt road for the people in Bamberg, it could be their hospital. That dirt road is a hardship that so many of us are suffering with across the state.
I remember a time when senators helped the people they represented. I want to bring the spirit of helping back.
We have to rebuild the trust of those people.
And that's why I am running for the United States Senate.
So that is a better ad than I or anyone at my firm could have written. Because it had some truth behind it. And most ads are 15 or 30 seconds long. Increasingly, they're 6 seconds long. That was something that you could only do online, which is another difference from back in the day. And most people on their phone, the average view of a Facebook ad is less than 3 seconds. So most people wouldn't do that. But the idea is, gosh, if somebody sits through that, hopefully by the end, they're convinced that Jamie Harrison's a good guy. And it's not something that you'll get, once again, most people won't make it through. It might be 3%. But if you do, hopefully you're converted. And that, I think, is an effective ad.
As I watch these ads, having been a candidate, I just think, oh God, they're so expensive. And I know you undercharge your clients and over-deliver, but how do you feel about the fundraising side of things? So every time I blanket the airwaves with this, someone over there has got to pay for it. And having been in your space, I wonder how you think about the other space, all the promises that have to be made to raise the money to do this kind of work.
I know this will shock you. I don't think it's a problem. And I think we need more money in politics. I say that. So there is a lot of money in politics. It's a growth industry. In full disclosure, like I get paid a commission when an ad gets served. So I'm for more money in politics. But I think you also have to realize, like, Verizon and AT&T spend more on marketing each year than the Democratic or Republican parties do on federal elections. And I think there's obviously one, and that includes all field, fundraising, ads, everything. Those two companies spend more, at least a couple years ago they did when I was pulling up that number, than all federal spending on elections. And so I think, what is more important? Ads are bad, and I think that's a problem. And it can be a problem when it is a barrier to candidates spend too much time raising money, and raising money oftentimes from people who have ulterior motives and all sorts of problems with it. But I still think most people still don't know who their member of Congress is. And so their ads are expensive, communications are expensive. I think we have to figure out a better way of maybe funding these campaigns, but I don't think the sort of raw volume of ads is the problem. But I may be the one person in this room who feels that way and have admittedly some ulterior motives.
So we've got a lot of people here from different backgrounds. Can you offer advice for two different groups, those who want to get involved in campaigns and those perhaps who want to run for office in some regard?
For those of you who want to run, I would just encourage you to do it. It is, and this is from somebody who's competitive, who likes to do all this stuff, but doesn't have the courage or charisma to be on the other side. So I want to admit that, but I think anyone who has either or both of those, I would strongly encourage them to run. Learning more about this, the Rockefeller Center, and reading about all the leadership training that they do here. This is a remarkable institution. I wish there was something like this where I went to school. And if there was, I hope that I would have taken advantage of it, like you guys are. It's a challenging thing. There's some great organizations on the left. There's an organization called Run for Something, which can help nurture this, people running. There are organizations like Emily's List, which supports pro-choice women up and down the ballot and has incredible resources to encourage people to run. I know on the left, or on the right, Americans for Prosperity and others invest a lot too in grassroots, and Republicans probably do a better job at that than we do. On our side, in running for school board, on running for local races, I encourage you to do it. Campaigns, I think it is a tough job. In part, everyone's out of work after the election, and that stinks. I remember after my first campaign, we won, and I thought I was going to be chief of staff on the Hill at 22, and instead I was, interning in D.C. and then working for the Trial Lawyers Association, doing some pretty and temping and doing just not particularly interesting stuff. It is long hours, and then there is an end date, and half the time you lose, and you have to travel around the country. It is a tough way to make a living, but it's really rewarding. Like, I get back to what I was saying before about my wife and how talented she is. But I feel very lucky that I'm able to make a living doing something that I care about a lot, and not just sort of being and I think if you're able to do that, whether that is politics or campaigns or farming or teaching, if you are able to sort of thread that needle, it's a pretty lucky thing to do.
We're going to go to questions in a minute, but I want to finish up with what do you think some of your best work is, where you look back either because it was a particular candidate or because it was a heavy lift and the work that you did actually moved it further than you would expect? And then I will warn you, we're going to do the things you might regret after that.
Yeah,
So we'll start with the best.
Sure. The highest profile race that I've been a part of in a leadership position was on the Senator Warnock's campaigns, and it was a really special moment to be down there in December with a core group of us who had been through this for basically nonstop for about 3 years. And we never were convinced we were going to win.
What was the final margin in that race?
I think it was about 2.8%. But that night, it was back and forth, and I think it's important to know, I was there with the pollster and everyone else, and none of us, and all the data people, none of us had any idea what was happening. We were all just like, nervous as hell and waiting on everything to come in. So no one, as William Goldman says, no one knows anything.
And the whole country, if not the whole world, is watching because it's the only race that's happening, unlike a normal election day.
But that felt really, really good to have gone through this and just to have spent so much time and stress for literally 3 years and for it to be at an end. And that was just a cathartic experience. Campaigns, I won't say the candidate, but we have at times, once again, we run a business. We're in this because we care about the work and everything, but we run a business, and at times you work for candidates, especially in primaries, who either because they're the ones that hire you, right? We don't get to pick it's not like a voter who gets to pick who they vote for. We have to both like the candidate and also get hired by them, and there's a lot of really smart women and men in our field who are also competing for these jobs. So sometimes you don't get the best candidate. Sometimes you get a candidate who you're like, well, this candidate, they wouldn't probably be who I'd vote for, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be able to fund their campaign. So there have been some candidates there where I would have preferred to vote for somebody else.
Have you ever voted for somebody other than your candidate?
So there's a great ad man from Chicago named Leo Burnett, who is one of the first really amazing advertisers and was responsible for Tony the Tiger and all sorts of things. He wrote this famous memo that you can look up called "Scratching the Back of the Hand That Feeds You." And what he said is I can't tell you which cigarettes to buy, but if you're debating, I'd suggest you buy Marlboro. I can't tell you which cereal to get for your family, but if you are debating, I would strongly encourage you to support Kellogg's. And so I can't think of a candidate who, if there was someone there have been candidates who I've worked for who have dropped out before they voting, but I don't think I've ever not voted for. Most of our candidates too, I should say, I don't get to vote for, right. Because they're people running in any place than my little neck of the woods.
All right, last, before we go to questions, any good Rod Blagojevich stories as an Illinoisan? or any other governor that's gone to jail? That broadens the question quite significantly.
I should think. I know we've had some. I didn't work for Blagojevich. He was a little bit. I was in D.C. When that was all. Happening. My only Rod Blagojevich story I have is we always do like at the end of the election, we have a wrap party. And it was for all of the people who work for us, and we always do it the night before graduation, or not graduation, the night before the election, because win or lose, you're like, we want to thank you for all the work that you've done, and it's better to do it when we're all feeling good. And we used to always do it in person, but last cycle we were all remote. And so we had like a Zoom one, and we had a few, what is it called, cameos?
Yeah.
Right, and we hired Blagojevich to say something obnoxious. I forget what it was.
That's almost redundant. So just by way of background, Blagojevich is the one who went to prison for selling Obama's Senate seat. And lesser known fact, everyone was wired up because he was being investigated for other crimes. That was just something he did while he was under surveillance.
Yes.
Then he went to prison, then he was pardoned by Trump, even though he was a Democrat. I will offer one Blagojevich
Yes,
story.
please.
So when I was running, I was campaigning in front of a church, and it was a very cool church.
And were you running for his old district, right?
Yes, this was his old seat, yeah. And Rahm's old seat as well, and Rostenkowski before that. So it was a church. It was a very cool church because at 9 o'clock it was in Spanish, the Mass, and at 10:30 it was in Polish, and at noon it was in English. Kind of represented the diversity of the district. So I was standing out there, and I had literature in different languages, which was kind of fun. And in the distance, I see this guy jogging slowly in a black tracksuit. And I had seen enough of Blagojevich on TV to think, like, no, what are the odds that? And slowly this figure comes, and he's running very slowly and awkwardly, and he just comes, and it's Rod Blagojevich, and he's in all black, so it's like the political equivalent of a black cat. And he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm, running for your old seat." He says, "You go get him," and runs on. So when Rod Blagojevich crosses your path, I'm not always sure that's a good thing. But, it happens if you spend enough time in Chicago. Okay, we have microphones out there. This is being simulcasted, so if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll call on you, and then wait for the microphone before you ask your question. So, questions for Mr. Meyer, right there, and wait for the microphone.
Thank you. With Senator Warnock competing against such a flawed candidate in Herschel Walker, why weren't you or the campaign able to widen the gap more than you did?
It's a great question, and I will push back at that a little bit. And which is, there was, I think, probably about a 10-point difference between the top of the ticket races. Between the governor's race, where Kemp won by quite a bit, and ours, where we won by about 0.5% or something on election day, and then a little bit more later. So that's a decent margin in a purple state where people are increasingly going on one side or the other. There aren't that many ticket splitters out there. The other thing I'd say, though, to not push back, but to agree with you and to maybe explain it a little bit, is sat in a lot of focus groups, and we would show ad after ad after ad and hit after hit after hit, and people would they start out liking Walker at the beginning, and then they would start to recoil, and they start to recoil, and they just kind of get lower and lower in their seat. Hate the guy, say awful things. Who are you going to vote for? Herschel Walker. Why? I say, because we don't need a leader, we need a voter. Right, that you knew how Herschel Walker, despite all of his personal issues, he was going to vote the same way as Mitt Romney, who probably would, for a lot of these suburban swing voters, may have preferred, or any other, or Ted Cruz. the voting record of the three of them would probably be incredibly similar. And so you knew what you were getting, and you weren't hiring a leader. And yes, he was embarrassing to a lot of people. But you knew what you were getting, and people cared about that. I also think that the election could have very well been different if the Senate was up for grabs in that special election, in that runoff. There were a lot of people who would end up in our focus groups and say, okay, I'll probably vote for Warnock. And then we'd say, okay, well, if the control of the Senate is on the line, who will you vote for? And these were people, a lot, because you're talking to not just everyone, you're talking to potential swing voters. A huge number of them would go back at that point and say, okay, at this point, my personal taste becomes less important, and if it's control of the Senate, I like people just inherently, swing voters inherently like the idea of divided government. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I leave to the professors here and the students and the public policy folks, but people inherently like that idea, and I think we would have, I think I don't know if we would have lost, but it would have surely been a whole lot closer than it was.
When we go way back there.
Yeah, hi. So I noticed a bit on the McKee ad, he really played up his Rhode Island accent.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys do a bit of coaching on with your candidates? Say, hey, like, lean into your regional accent, because I feel like it definitely helps in general.
Absolutely. And it is something that we try to play up. It is something, too, that, it helps to have candidates who know where they're representing, and a team that knows where they're working, and it's also something that we always look for, like if there's ever like stock footage or something that is inauthentic. One, we always have to source everything, every bus, every license plate, everything, to make sure that it is as close to the area where it is. And it's also a place where we try to ding other candidates if they're talking about Rhode Island. But there was actually it's a guy running for Congress in New Jersey, and they were talking about inflation and the cost of milk. And the milk that they were holding up, like milk is a very regional thing. You have your local, every community, whether it's Dean or whatever, like ice cream and milk especially are local. And he had these like label. I'm like, I'm just betting that is not right. And it was a Northern California label of milk. So we put out a press release. It was probably read by about 3 people, but it made us feel good. Yeah.
Let's come all the way up front.
Early on, we talked about the winner take all approach.
Yeah.
That if you got 51% of the votes, you felt like you won. Well, I wonder if that's again contrary to the strategy of shit. I'll pass right now. Thanks.
Oh, sure. I think this might have been where you were going. I think it can be it can be a bad thing. I think there are a lot of problems in electoral politics. I think more than elections, it is the 50+1 winner-take-all system. And I think, too, especially in primaries, it can be a bad thing. I haven't done the research or read the analysis. I'm sure other people here have, but like the system that they have in California, which is a top 2 system, inherently makes a lot of sense to me. Where in the primary, whether you're 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 1 of each, the top 2 vote getters move on, which theoretically can help somebody who is a has maybe broader appeal besides their base.
Alaska now has top 4.
Is that
open
right?
primary. Same idea. Yeah, and you can be 3 Republicans and a Democrat with ranked choice, where you have to be someone's second choice in the general. So, yeah, I mean, it's a time for another discussion, but there are procedural things.
And I've had ranked choice explained to me like 6 times because we do Maine, and I never understood it. But
All right, we'll do that
all right.
afterwards. Ross, we got to go right behind you there.
Is polling working, or is polling broken, or something in between?
Yeah, it's terribly broken. I think the thing, there's a lot of stories about why polling is broken and talk about response rates are so low, 1% to 3%, and all of that. But I think even if you assume that they're representative samples, the biggest problem for polling for me, and we've spoken about this, is the head-to-head, which everyone's like, oh, polling was off, right? The presidential race, we thought it was going to be Hillary and it was Trump. People have really strong opinions on Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Joe Biden, or even, Chris Pappas, or I'm trying to remember what her name, what was that? Annie Kuster, or whoever she was running against. But people have opinion on the head-to-head. The way that we as ad makers use polls is much less about who's winning and who's losing, but asking, basically we read ad scripts. And a poll can be about 15 minutes long. Even if it's 12 minutes long, a lot of times we will basically read these scripts to people 12 minutes into a poll. And then people say, well, does this make you much more likely, somewhat more likely to vote for Annie Kuster? And then getting to the point of candidates and campaigns being risk adverse, they say, well, this script, 64% people said it was very convincing, whereas the other one was 61%. But it's a totally artificial experience to hear something after 11 minutes, and doesn't hit that responsive core that hopefully some of our ads do. And so all the ads end up being the same, in part because everyone says a lot of the same, that they care about a lot of the same issues, but they don't necessarily strike something relevant to the person or the candidate, and it just, the margin of error is infinitely stronger 12 minutes into a poll where you're asked a series of 5 different scripts than they are 2 minutes into a poll where they ask your head-to-head. So if there's a margin of error there, the margin of error is infinitely larger in the part of the instrument that we as ad makers focus on. So there's now a lot of more interesting ways of doing this. There's and it's a place, none of it is perfect. One of the more interesting places is a company called Swayable, where what they do is on your phone, they recruit you by saying like they'll give you like tokens for like Words with Friends or some video game if you answer a survey and watch an ad, and then they compare that. You watch an ad and then you answer a long survey, and they compare that to other ads or a PSA of that's completely unrelated, and you can it's less awkward, it's less artificial. I think that is moving better in the right direction. I also think, and this maybe puts me in the minority, if you're looking for head-to-head polls, the sort of gold standard of live callers and these with great pollsters, I think it's better to probably do really cheap polls, an IVR poll, which is just like an automated response, like asking you 1 or 2 questions with a really big sample size. You probably get a better response. The other thing I would say though is like, not only are polls accurate, but like, do polls matter, right? Like, does it really matter? Who should really care about whether a candidate is ahead or behind? Because theoretically, you shouldn't be voting for a candidate because they're ahead or behind. It should be on an issue. Like, I think reporters love to talk about polls and people love to talk about polls. But I don't think that they really matter all that much, should matter as much as they do to the conversations and the narrative of campaigns. And they should certainly matter less, I would argue, for what the ads look like.
All right, last question. There we go.
Great. With the truth being under assault and alternative facts, is there, in making an ad, is there any sort of red line or, I don't know, agreement that just is a bridge too far when you make an ad?
Every candidate has that. Our firm, I like to think, has that. The people who we work for, I think, do. Candidates have a whole lot more leeway to say nasty things than these sort of dark money 527 groups, super PACs. They have a really strict. They can get ads taken down all the time, especially on TV. It's harder to do that online, but like there will be legal challenges there, and the good, well-financed organizations will not allow you to say things that are indefensible. Candidates have freedom of speech has been defined as being much more lenient there. Yeah, I mean, I think there is too often do we say sort of the ends justify the means, or ends justify the means. Going back to that example for Ken Salazar, that's probably a pretty nasty ad. We probably shouldn't have run that ad. It was truthful, but like, you know, that was pretty bad. The other thing that I'm interested in that I don't know nearly enough about, but like online, people in focus groups always say I do my homework, and it's really funny because people generally don't, and they'll be at the end of a 90-minute focus group where they learn more about these candidates than anybody ever would, and their way of saying, like, I don't want to admit that I'm voting for Herschel Walker, but I am, is I just have to do my homework on both of the candidates. But search, which is a huge part of consumer marketing, much bigger than any other part of digital ads, is something that I don't think campaigns do enough of. And especially from a persuasion standpoint, and part of that is because websites are terrible for campaigns. But doing a better job of persuasion search and doing more search ads, which sort of gets to whether it's the truth or not. When people generally don't say they don't believe what they see on TV, they often do. But if I think there is some evidence that people, when they search something, they have more confidence in themselves, and they think that they are getting something right. And so I think we need to do more on search. And what I don't know anything about is, like, will these chatbots that are now being part of, Bing announced it and Google too, like, what those effects on political discourse and truth, capital T truth, are. I'm super interested there, and I probably know less about that than just about everybody else here in this room.
I'm sure it'll be a highly positive impact. All right, thank you for joining us. Thank you for engaging us in your work, and welcome to the Upper Valley.
Great, thank you.